Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. A couple weeks ago, my husband Bird and we did a video talking about our trip to Guatemala. And in that video, I talked about how I was going to share some of the tips that we have picked up. And so that's what I wanted to do today. If you guys are anything like us, then you know that traveling, especially traveling with kids, can be really stressful. And we have done it a lot. We have traveled internationally. We've traveled to Europe, Central America. We have done short road trips, long road trips. We've traveled pretty much any way that you can imagine. So today I'm going to specifically talk about traveling when you are flying, but a lot of these are things that would be true for road trips as well. If you guys are interested to hear like tips that we have picked up over the years in our vast amount of times that we have driven between Oklahoma and California. I think the last time we did it, we counted it up and it was 22. But we are not going to talk as much about road tripping today. I want to specifically focus on if you are flying with kids. The first thing that I will say is that you want to budget. Make sure that you are budgeting for everything. So this is just going to give you a lot of peace of mind for your whole trip, making sure that you are going to be able to afford everything that you're doing. So you want to budget obviously for your flight, you want to budget for where you're staying once you get there, any activities that you're doing, but also make sure that you have a food budget, that you have a budget for any like souvenirs that you want to get while you are there. Make sure that you have an emergency fund when you're there, just in case. You never know. When we went to Europe, we had flown into Paris, and the next day we flew out and flew from there to Rome and stayed in Rome for a few days, and then we were supposed to fly back to Paris. But when we got to the airport in Rome to fly back to Paris, we found out that our flight had been changed and we hadn't been notified. So we were stuck, I guess, in Rome for the night, but we made the best of it. It was pretty amazing. It's actually our favorite night of our whole trip. But because we had planned for an emergency fund to just make sure that we had contingency there, we were able to, not make it a big deal. It didn't have to be a thing that we really worried about. The Lord ended up providing for us anyway, and everything ended up being covered. But in that moment, I was very thankful that we had an emergency fund set aside specifically for moments like that. So make sure that you're budgeting for that. Other things that you want to think about are if you are parking your car at the airport, make sure that you are budgeting for that. If you are renting a vehicle when you get to your location, make sure that you're budgeting for gas. So there's all those little things that you want to think about. Anything that you budget for in your regular life, make sure that you're budgeting for those things as well. And then the last part of that, I would say, is make sure that you are budgeting for whenever you get home. So this has happened to us in the past that for whatever reason, it did not cross my mind that we may need to make sure that we have money when we get home. And then we would get home and need to go pick up groceries and didn't have anything left in our budget to do that because we had spent everything on our trip. So make sure that you are thinking about for when you get home as well. So flying. I would say that flying is probably my kids' favorite form of travel. They like to road trip, but if they could choose, they will always fly. It's just fun to get on a plane with them. But it is a lot. So some things that we have picked up as far as flying goes, and this would be true internationally as well as just in the country. The first thing that we found to be true is spending the least amount of time getting to our gate as possible was mandatory for us. So we have 4 kids. One of them is a toddler, but we still only do carry-on luggage. So because we have to buy a ticket for each person, for the vast majority of airlines anyway, you're going to get a carry-on bag and a personal item. And so everyone has a carry-on bag and a backpack. And the things that we will need for our trip once we get to our destination go in the carry-on bag, and anything that we want in the plane or in the airport goes in our backpack. And then if we need anything overflow, that can go in the bottom of our backpack. But that's how we are able, first of all, to save some money because we aren't paying $75 per bag to check a bag. But also it just saves us time. So when we will check in on our phones and make sure that we have our boarding passes before we ever get to the airport. We walk into the airport, we go straight to security, get through security, and then we can go to our gate. And I have found that that has been by far the easiest way for us to do it. One thing that you want to keep in mind that we definitely took advantage of on our last trip to Guatemala was we made sure and bring things for the layovers more so than things for the actual plane. So when we were on the actual airplane, we found that everybody just kind of wanted to relax and hang out and talk, not necessarily like play games or anything. So everything that we brought really was more with our layover in mind rather than the actual airplane. So some things that we have found that have been great are any kind of card games. So like Skip Boat, Uno, Phase 10. We got one this last trip. I think it was called Five Alive, and that one was really fun. We really enjoyed playing that one. There's a dice game called Tenzi that my kids and I really, really like to play. That's a fun one. Heads Up on your phone is a great game to play. We tend to shy away from anything that has like a lot of little pieces. So we aren't going to bring like dolls, Legos, anything like that. Just that kind of stuff, you're going to get lost and then it's in an airport somewhere, you're never going to get that back. So any of that stuff we don't do, but we also do things that are electronic. So that's a great time if your kids are going to do screens. That's a great time for that. My kids each have a Kindle, and we would download movies and TV shows from Disney Plus, make sure that they are on their Kindles when we leave, and then they have access to that. The next thing that we always make sure that we have are snacks. So if you have ever priced food in an airport, you know that that is the most expensive meal that your family can ever eat pretty much. So we definitely try to make sure that we have snacks. So you do have to keep TSA regulations in mind. So we can't have things that are liquid unless it is just really small, but that didn't really seem worth it. So what we did is we would bring snacks, things like beef jerky. You can bring peanut butter sandwiches if they are in a Ziploc bag. We brought peanut butter and cheese crackers. We made sure to have things like goldfish, fruit strips, that sort of thing. Things that are not going to be too much sugar, because when the kids are confined in an airplane, the last thing that you want is for them to be having a sugar rush. So we made sure to bring things that weren't super sugary, but things that were going to be pretty filling. And then we would just buy drinks at the airport. And we found that that was the most cost-effective way for us to get through the airport and not feel like we're starving at the end. And then once we get to our destination, one of the first things that we usually do is find a place to go have dinner that is not at the airport prices. So as far as layovers go, you don't really always have a choice what you're going to do. When you're looking for a flight, you always make sure that you're paying attention to how long that layover is, because as adults, we can sit in an airport for 6 to 8 hours and scroll on our phones or talk or take a little nap or whatever we want to do. And it's not a big deal. But for kids, that's a giant amount of time. And so what we found is any layover that is 4 hours or over, we opted to go for an overnight layover instead, if that's possible. So I found under 4 hours of a layover is not terrible. We can have snacks, we can play games, we can kind of deal with that. Anything more than that is just too much for my kids. So on this last trip, what we did was, when I saw that I had the option of either a 4 hour plus layover, I think it was like 6.5 hours, or an overnight layover, we opted for the overnight layover. We got to our airport that the layover was at, and we left the airport. We Ubered, got a hotel, slept for 6-8 hours. The kids went swimming, we had a dinner, it was great. And then the next morning we got up. We did have to go through security again, but we found that that wasn't that big of a deal. So I would always opt for, if you have to do a long layover, try to get one that is overnight when at all possible. So then the next thing that I would suggest is you're going through the airport, you have all of these things, make sure that you don't overpack. So for us specifically, we will go on a trip usually around 2 weeks, depending upon where it is that we're going. But for the most part, we try to go for around 2 weeks. We always only bring enough clothes for about half of that time. So we always try to make sure that wherever it is that we're going, we have some way to do laundry. That just makes packing lighter just that much easier. The next tip that I would say is pack as light as possible. So because we only ever take carry-on bags, we do have to be really cautious about that. We cannot overpack because we just don't have the room for it. But one of the things that we always do is make sure that a place that we are going when we get to our destination gives us some way to do laundry. One of the things I have found is that if we are going somewhere that we can do this, we always do some sort of a pickup order once we get there. So that's going to help us save on like the food and stuff that we're going to eat throughout the week. But it also keeps us from having to pack some of the things that we can just get when we are there. So one of the main things that I like to do is, rather than bring all of our like shampoo and conditioner and all of that stuff, if I'm going to buy that, especially for the trip anyway, I would rather buy it once we get there. So I like to do either a Walmart or a Target pickup order. You can do those online, have it ready to go so that you can just swing through, pick it up on your way. Or if you're going somewhere like LA, like the last time we went there, I was able to do a delivery directly to the house that we were staying at, and that made it even that much easier. The next tip I would suggest is, once you get to your location, make sure that you are staying somewhere that your kids can just be kids. So kids are loud, they can be kind of disruptive, and that's okay, that's what kids are, but make sure that you're staying somewhere that is possible. The last thing that I'm going to touch on is transportation. So we have gone both ways on this, honestly. So it kind of depends for us where we are going. Sometimes when we go on a trip, we have found it most cost effective to rent a vehicle, and then once we get to the airport, pick our vehicle up, and we just drive everywhere that we're going to go on our own. And make sure that we budget for gas while we're there. That's very important. The other option is, if you don't want to rent a car, you can use public transportation, or you can do Ubers everywhere that you go. So in the end, we love to travel. These are some tips that we have picked up along the way, and I really hope that these are helpful for you guys. I will say these are all things that I wish when we first started traveling somebody had told me. So I hope that that's beneficial for somebody out there. If you guys have any tips of your own that you would love to share, I would love to hear them. We are always open to learning. So just leave those down in the comments below. We will definitely read anything that you guys share with us. So thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys next time.